The bride's hand looked elegant at first, but that changed once historians enlarged the photo. Dr. Evelyn Chase had reviewed many wedding portraits from the years right after the Civil War, yet something about this one made her stop. The picture had arrived at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture from a church in Charleston, South Carolina. It showed a young black couple on their wedding day, dated June 14, 1868, written on the back in faded ink. Despite its age, the photograph was in great shape. It was printed on thick cardstock and had been kept inside a family Bible for more than 150 years. The bride stood on the left in a simple, neat dress made of light fabric. It was likely her nicest outfit, updated with lace around the collar and cuffs. Her hair was pulled tightly back, showing her high cheekbones and steady, direct gaze. The groom stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. He wore a dark suit that was a bit too big, probably borrowed. His expression was serious and respectful, as if he understood the importance of the moment. This was 1868, only 3 years after slavery ended and just months after the 14th Amendment recognized formerly enslaved people as citizens. What caught Evelyn's attention most were the bride's hands. They were folded at her waist, fingers intertwined, posed in the usual way for wedding portraits of that time. They looked graceful, arranged with care. But the position was slightly tense, almost like she was shaping her hands on purpose to show only certain angles. Evelyn had seen this before in other photos where people tried to hide old injuries. She turned on her high-resolution scanner, the same machine she used to uncover medical details in historic images. It could reveal textures, marks, and scars the eye could not normally see. She placed the photograph on the scanner and started the process. As the light moved across the old print, she watched the image load on her screen and expected to find the usual small details. Fabric texture, clearer facial features, maybe a faded photographer's mark. Once the high-quality image appeared, she began adjusting the settings and studying each part, just as she always did. When she zoomed in on the bride's hands, she suddenly stopped. The enlarged image showed scars across the bride's palms, fingers, and wrists. These were deep, textured scars, not small ones from everyday accidents. They looked like the result of intense burns, repeated injury, and healing without proper care. The bride had clearly arranged her hands to hide the worst areas, showing mostly the backs of her hands where the scars were lighter. But the scan revealed everything: tight, puckered skin, stiff fingers, and marks that showed long past pain. Evelyn leaned back, realizing this photo wasn't only a wedding portrait. It was also a record of what this woman had lived through. The bride knew exactly how she wanted to be seen, shaping her hands to show strength and grace even though the scars could never fully disappear. Evelyn spent the next hour studying the enlarged image. The scars were clearly old, healed long before the photo was taken. Most were on the palms and fingertips, with more hidden under the lace at her wrists. The pattern suggested repeated contact with hot metal, open flames, or other dangerous surfaces. The marks on her wrists looked like they came from restraints or ropes. Evelyn was familiar with accounts from the time of slavery, including descriptions of punishments and injuries. She had studied photographs of formerly enslaved people that documented physical harm, but those images had been created as evidence. This wedding photo was different. The bride chose to be photographed on one of the most important days of her life, carrying scars she could not escape yet presenting herself with dignity. Evelyn called her colleague, Dr. Marcus Webb from the Atlanta Historical Society, who specialized in African American history after the Civil War. "Marcus, I need you to look at something," she said. "It's a wedding photo from Charleston, 1868. The bride's hands have major burn scars, and she's trying to hide them." Marcus asked her to send the scan. When he opened it and zoomed in, she heard him react quietly. "What happened to her?" he asked. Evelyn replied, "That's what we need to figure out." The photo came from Mount Zion Church. It was stored in a family Bible. We have the date, but no names. Marcus thought for a moment. Charleston in 1868. That was right after the war. Union troops were there. The Freemans Bureau was active, and black residents were registering marriages and families for the first time. This couple had been enslaved only 3 years earlier. And those scars are older than that. They both grew quiet, looking again at the image of the bride. Her hands were carefully posed, and her direct stare now seemed full of quiet strength. "We need to find out who she was," Marcus finally said. "Her story matters." 2 days later, he arrived in Washington with boxes of records from Charleston: marriage documents, church lists, Freeman's bureau files, and newspaper archives. He spread everything across Evelyn's table as they began building a timeline of black life in Charleston after the Civil War. The city in 1868 was changing rapidly. The war had devastated the old economy. Former slaveholders had lost their power, and formerly enslaved people were now citizens building new lives. People were voting, running for office, opening businesses, and most importantly, getting married. Marcus slid a record across the table from the Freedmen's Bureau, titled Register Marriages of Freed People, Charleston District, 1865 to 1869. The ledger listed hundreds of couples who had lived together during slavery but had never been legally recognized until freedom allowed their unions to become official. Marriage was one of the very first steps people took after emancipation, Marcus said. Under slavery, their marriages had no legal protection, and families could be separated at any time. After 1865, marriage brought rights, security, and the ability to claim and protect your own children. It was proof of personhood. Evelyn scanned the entries for June 14, 1868. 17 couples were married that day, likely because it was a Sunday. Many names included only first names or new surnames chosen after freedom. Enslaved people were often denied last names or forced to use the names of the people who owned them. One entry stood out. Thomas Freeman and Patience, both formerly enslaved, married June 14, 1868, at Mount Zion Church. Witnesses: Reverend Samuel Green and Mary Freeman. Freeman, Evelyn said quietly. That was a common name for newly freed people. It was a statement, Marcus replied. Choosing the name Freeman meant you were free and no one owned you anymore. And look, they were married at Mount Zion, the same church that donated the photo. A spark of hope ran through Evelyn. Thomas Freeman and Patience. They might be the couple in the photograph. We need more proof, Marcus said, pulling out another document, the 1870 census for Charleston. I checked already. Here's a Thomas Freeman, black, 28 years old, working as a carpenter, living on Meeting Street. And living with him is Patience Freeman, black, 24, listed as keeping house. That has to be them, Evelyn said, her voice catching. Marcus didn't look relieved. He pointed to a faint note written next to Patience's name, hands damaged, unable to perform fine work. The room went still. That single note from a census worker in 1870 confirmed what the scanned photo showed. Patience Freeman's hands were so visibly injured that a stranger felt the need to record it. What kind of work would cause damage like that? Evelyn asked, though she had an idea. Marcus opened a folder filled with records about Charleston's economy before the war. Charleston made its money in several ways: rice plantations, cotton plantations, and inside the city, ironworks, foundries, and turpentine operations. Enslaved people worked in all of them, but burns like we saw in that photograph point toward one place. He opened an 1850s business directory showing 3 major ironworks: Charleston Iron Works, Palmetto Iron Works, and Bennett's Foundry. All of them relied on enslaved labor. Evelyn understood right away. Work in iron foundries meant handling red-hot metal, standing close to furnaces and pouring molten iron. Injuries were common, and care was minimal. We need to find out if Patience worked in one of these, she said. We need to know what happened to her. The Charleston Iron Works had been one of the largest industrial centers in the South, with more than 200 workers, most of them enslaved. Even though the facility was partly destroyed in the war, its records survived in the South Carolina Historical Society archives. Marcus spent 3 days in Charleston going through those boxes, while Evelyn continued searching in Washington. The Iron Works had kept detailed notes, production logs, supply sheets, and even a ledger listing enslaved workers hired from their owners. On Thursday evening, Marcus called, his voice unsteady. I found her. Patience is in the Charleston Iron Works hiring records from 1859 to 1864. What do they say? Evelyn asked. She was hired out by her owner, Robert Middleton. He ran a rice plantation outside Charleston and rented out enslaved workers to industrial sites for extra income. Patience was assigned to the mold-pouring area. That's where molten iron was poured into casts, one of the most dangerous jobs in the entire place. Evelyn pictured Patience at 13 years old in 1859, working beside furnaces hot enough to melt iron, using tools far too heavy and hot for a child, and facing risks that could permanently injure her hands. "There's more," Marcus continued. They kept injury records, too. I found several entries for Patience between 1860 and 1863. He read them one by one. February 1860. Patience burned her hands from splashed iron. Treated with lard. 3 days recovery. August 1860. Patience burned her right palm on hot tongs. No treatment. Returned to work. November 1861. Patience burned both hands from spilled molten metal. Treated by Dr. Simons. 2 weeks recovery. They kept sending her back into the same work. Evelyn said quietly. Marcus read the final entry. March 1863. Patience suffered severe burns to her hands and wrists from an accident at the furnace. Hands permanently damaged. Reassigned to cleaning and sorting work. After that, her name disappeared from the hiring list. Milton likely stopped renting her out because her hands were too damaged for heavy labor. Evelyn thought of the wedding photograph taken only 5 years later. Patience was 21 when she married Thomas Freeman. Her hands showed the long-term results of years of dangerous work that began when she was still a child. "We have to learn more about her," Evelyn said. Not just the injury she survived, but the life she built afterward. She made it through all of that. She lived through slavery, gained her freedom, married, and created a future. That's the story. Surprisingly, they found Patience's own words in a place Evelyn hadn't expected. The testimonies collected by the Freedmen's Bureau. The Bureau had recorded thousands of statements from formerly enslaved people asking for unpaid wages, help finding family, or legal recognition of marriages. In National Archives, Evelyn found a testimony given by Patience Freeman in November 1868, only 5 months after her wedding. It was her claim for compensation for the years she worked at the Charleston Iron Works. The statement was taken by a Bureau agent named Jonathan Webster and preserved clearly. Testimony of Patience Freeman, formerly enslaved by Robert Milton, Charleston District, given November 18, 1868. I am 22 years old. I was born on Mr. Middleton's plantation. When I was 13, he sent me to work at the Charleston Iron Works. I worked there from 1859 to 1863. My job was to help pour melted iron into molds. It was hot and dangerous. Many people got burned. I was burned many times. The first time was just a splash on my hand. It hurt badly, but they put grease on it and made me return to work the next day. After that, I got burned again and again. Some burns were small, some were worse. The masters did not care unless you could not work. In 1863, a pot of melted iron tipped over and spilled on my hands and arms. I screamed, and they took me to the doctor. He said my hands were ruined. The skin later grew back hard and tight. I could not open my fingers fully anymore, and I could not hold small things. My hands hurt all the time for 2 years, the testimony continued. Mr. Middleton was upset because I could no longer work at the iron works. He put me to cleaning rice and sorting bowls, but with my hands in bad shape, I was not worth the same money to him. When freedom came, I was thankful because I believed I would never have to work near hot iron again. I am married now to Thomas Freeman, a carpenter. I keep house for him, but my hands make it hard to cook or sew. I am filing this claim because I worked 4 years at the Charleston Iron Works and never received any pay. All the money went to Mr. Middleton. I believe I should receive something for my work and for the damage to my hands. Signed with her mark, as Patience could not write due to her injuries. Evelyn read the testimony 3 times. Crying as she did, Patience spoke clearly and calmly for more than a century and a half and past, describing what she lived through without anger and without asking for pity. She explained her injuries with the steady voice of someone who had learned to work around them. The note, signed with her mark, stayed with Evelyn. Patience may not have learned to write, or she may not have been able to hold a pen because of her scars. The record did not say, but she still made sure her experience was recorded and filed a claim, even though she likely knew the odds were low. Marcus located the outcome of her claim in the Bureau's files. It read, "Claim denied. No legal duty to provide payment for labor performed during slavery. Petitioner may seek action through civil courts." Patience received nothing. Her years of work, her injuries, and her lasting disability did not qualify for compensation under the laws at that time. Even so, she had still stood before an agent, spoken her truth, and added her name to the record. 6 months before giving that testimony, she had stood beside Thomas in the wedding photograph, presenting herself as a bride beginning a new chapter, not simply as someone harmed by the past. While Evelyn focused on Patience's testimony, Marcus continued tracing Thomas Freeman's history. What he found helped complete the picture and showed why the couple's wedding portrait held so much meaning. Thomas appeared in Freedmen's Bureau files from 1865, right after Charleston was liberated. He applied for a certificate of freedom and registered his name as Thomas Freeman, age 25, formerly enslaved by the estate of Charles Morrison. The record listed him as a trained carpenter skilled in making furniture and building structures. His own testimony, given in 1867 when he applied to open a carpentry shop, revealed how closely his story connected to Patience's. He wrote, "I learned carpentry in Mr. Morrison's furniture shop in Charleston. I was trained from age 12 to make fine furniture. Morrison hired me out and kept all my wages. When the war began in 1861, he sent me to work for the Confederate government. I built fortifications and gun carriages. Many men died doing that work. I survived because they needed carpenters. In 1864, I was sent to the Charleston Iron Works to make wooden molds for the foundry. That is where I met Patience. She worked pouring the melted iron into the molds I made. I saw the injuries that kind of work caused. I saw Patience burn badly. I saw them make her keep working even when her hands were wrapped in cloth. When freedom came in 1865, I promised myself I would build a good life. I also promised that if Patience survived the war, I would find her and ask her to marry me. I saw her strength every day. She helped other workers, teaching them how to avoid burns. She was the bravest person I ever knew." The moment Marcus found this document, he called Evelyn. "They knew each other during slavery," he said. "Thomas saw what she went through. He understood exactly what happened to her." Evelyn immediately thought of the photograph. Thomas's hand resting on Patience's shoulder was not just a formal pose. It was a hand of someone who had witnessed her injuries and stood beside her long before freedom. He chose to build a future with her not in spite of her damaged hands, but with full understanding of the strength behind them. "This changes the entire meaning of the photograph," Evelyn said. "It's not just a wedding picture. It's the record of two people who survived the same workplace, reunited after freedom, and legally married. Thomas knew her story. He lived part of it with her." "That's not all," Marcus added. "I found his workshop records. From 1868 to 1890, Thomas employed more than 30 people, all formerly enslaved. Many had injuries or disabilities. Thomas's notes showed how he adapted work for them. James, missing right hand, trained for one-handed planing. Samuel, burned arms, assigned to sanding. He built a shop that gave opportunities to people who had been pushed aside," Evelyn said. "And Patience worked with him," Marcus continued. "She couldn't handle small tools, but she kept the accounts, arranged contracts, and met with customers. They ran the business together." The 1870 census that first confirmed their identities held one more important detail. Freeman Thomas, head, age 28, carpenter. Freeman, Patience, wife, age 24, keeping house. Freeman, Clara, daughter, age 1. They had a daughter, born in 1869. Clara Freeman was the first in her family born free under the law. She grew up in a home led by a skilled craftsman and a mother who had endured the harshest working conditions of slavery, but built a new life after freedom. Evelyn followed Clara's trail through later census records. In 1880, at age 11, she was listed as attending school. That simple note meant everything. Patience, who had been working at a dangerous ironworks at 13, made sure her daughter had access to an education. By 1900, Clara was living in Philadelphia with her husband, a teacher named James Stevens. She was listed as a seamstress, a job that required careful handwork her mother could never do again. Marcus found her name again in the membership records of the Philadelphia chapter of the National Association of Colored Women. Clara joined in 1901 and served on the Committee for Industrial Education, supporting job training for young black women. In 1908, she delivered a speech at the group's annual meeting. The archive speech held a passage that stopped Evelyn and Marcus in their tracks. Clara spoke about her mother's injured hands, burned when she worked at an iron works in Charleston. The scars stayed with her for life. She could not sew, write, or do detailed work, yet she taught her daughter to value learning. Clara said her mother showed her that survival was only the starting point, and that each generation must build something better. "My mother's scarred hands shaped my future," she said. Evelyn and Marcus knew they needed to trace the family line. Clara had 4 children, all college-educated. Her youngest, Dorothy, became a social worker active in the civil rights movement. Dorothy's daughter, Patricia Morrison, was still alive in Maryland. When Evelyn called her, Patricia said she had researched her family for years but knew little about Thomas and Patience's lives during slavery. Evelyn sent the wedding photograph. Patricia gasped when she saw it. Her family had lost early photos in a fire. Evelyn asked her to zoom in on Patience's hands. Patricia saw the scars and listened as Evelyn explained the ironworks records, Patience's testimony, and Clara's speech. Patricia cried as she learned the details her family had never known. Months later, the Smithsonian opened an exhibit titled Hands That Built Freedom. Patience and Thomas's wedding photos stood at the center, enlarged to show the careful pose and the scars she had tried to hide. The display included the injury logs, the bureau testimony, Thomas's petition to open his shop, census records, and photos of the family through 5 generations. A new picture showed Patricia and members of the family standing at Mount Zion Church, where Patience and Thomas married. The exhibit explained that Patience was 13 when she was forced to work near furnaces over 2,000 degrees. Burns left her hands permanently injured. She married Thomas in 1868, and together they built a life that lifted future generations. Despite her injuries, she helped run the carpentry business and raise a daughter who became an educated leader. At the exhibit opening, Patricia's 7-year-old granddaughter, also named Patience, studied the photograph and asked why her ancestors' hands looked that way. Patricia explained gently, and the child said, "I'm glad she didn't give up." The story spread, inspiring families with similar histories. Evelyn later began the Scarred Hands Archive to document stories like Patience's. Back in her office, she returned to scanning more old photographs, knowing many lives still waited to be recognized.